Hey guys, what is up? Carter here. Have another video for you. This is going to be a head-to-head comparison between the Chris Reeve Sebenza, right here, and the Chris Reeve Umnumzaan, up at the top there. First I got to apologize, I'm still a little bit under the weather. I debated about doing this video, but I just felt like doing it. I just wanted to make a video, so I'm going to try to get through it. If I cough or anything, I apologize, but I'll try to keep it under control. So what we have here is basically, well, first let's talk about the influence of these knives. What kind of the design thought is between them. The um-num-zahn is Chris Reeve's kind of answer to the hard-use tactical crowd, whereas the Sebenza is a little bit more of a practical gentleman's folder type knife. Now that being said, neither one of these kind of take that concept and push it all the way, if that makes sense. Meaning that this is not like a completely gentleman-y folder. It still has a lot of tactical capability and features to it. It's a very strong and robust knife. And alternately, this knife too is still very elegant, and it's an excellent cutter. It's not taking the hard use thing and pushing it to the limit with, you know, a giant overbuilt knife. It's still very in line with kind of the Chris Reeve aesthetic. So let's get into it. First off, let's talk about similarities. As you can see here, we're dealing with knives that are almost the exact same size, right? Pretty much the same exact total length, blade length is the same, cutting edge is the same. Even the width is pretty dang close to being the same. The blade steel on both of these is S35VN, both same stonewash. Both have titanium slabs on the handle here. Both have polished hardware. Titanium frame locks, as you can see. Pocket clips are identical. And then also, the construction on the bottom is very similar. Similar? Why did I say similar? That's not a word. Similar. You have the lanyard pin right here and here at the bottom, and then you have your standoff right here. And that comprises the entire construction from here down. The difference is that this is a large blue anodized barrel spacer, whereas this is a pillar that's used, and it is not anodized. Now let's start with the differences. Blades. We'll start with the blades. Now, of course, these two have very different blade shapes, but your standard Sebenza is going to be fairly similar to this in terms of at least the sweep and the belly and things like that, as well as the grind height and things. They're both hollow ground, so excellent slicers, come to a nice thin, you know, quite thin behind that edge there. So definitely very sharp out of the box. Great slicers. The um-num-zahn has a few extra things going on up at the top here. As you can see, you've got kind of a harpoon swedge. It's not really a swedge. It's literally like a harpoon. It almost has a ground edge on top here. It just barely is shy of being sharp at the top. So you could actually sharpen that if you wanted to, but I would not recommend that because it would probably cause trouble. The Insingo has something similar going on, but your standard Sebenza isn't going to have this. So that's quite a big difference between the two, the standard Sebenza compared to the um-num-zahn. Um-num-zahn, you've got kind of a thumb rest right here. You can put that in the Filipino grip if you're going to use this kind of as a fighting knife, or also just to give you a little bit more control when you're using the blade. You've got this cut dip right here, whereas the standard Sebenza doesn't have that. Of course, you can put your thumb there, but you're not going to have that dip to put it into. The Sebenza has a radiused spine right here, whereas the um-num-zahn just kind of has some beveling done on it. It's not quite radiused. The jimping is very similar, same exact cut. The um-num-zahn does give you a slight bit more angle, but it's really quite similar between the two. This also has maybe, it's a little bit flatter, I guess you could say. So I would say the um-num-zahn is slightly grippier, but nothing major. Blade thickness. Now here's a difference right here. The um-num-zahn is thicker stock. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe this is about 3 millimeter, and I think this is 3.5. So it's, and if that's not right, the comparison, the ratio between the two is about that. It's not, you know, twice as thick or 50% thicker. Well, actually, it is about 50% thicker. Or not 50% thicker, but half of a millimeter thicker, sorry. So it is thicker, but nothing extreme. The titanium slabs are the same. I have measured them. The Sebenza seems thinner at first just because it has a greater bevel on the side here, whereas this is kind of just more radiused. It doesn't really have that bevel to it. So when you hold them side by side, you tend to want to compare the inside bevel mark to the full slab here, but I believe they are the exact same on the two. They both have, I believe I already mentioned, obviously you can see here they're both titanium frame locks. However, the locking mechanism is completely different. This has a contact with the titanium right onto the tang, whereas the um-num-zahn actually has a ceramic ball that is pressed in that interacts with the tang and also acts as the detent. This has a smaller ceramic ball that's used only for the detent that you typically see. This has a over travel. However, the older um-num-zahns do not, so it is a newer feature, but as far as I know, there's no plans to put that on either the Sebenza 21 or the new Sebenza 25 that's coming up. This uses dual thumb studs to stop the blade. It hits the titanium slabs, whereas the um-num-zahn, or sorry, the Sebenza just has a stop pin. It's kind of a barrel spacer type stop pin that actually stops the blade. Because of that, this automatically comes with dual thumb studs, whereas the Sebenza, the standard Sebenza, only comes with one. You can pay extra to get two. This knife, I mentioned the anodizing here, but the thumb stud's also anodized, whereas the um-num-zahn has no anodizing to it at all. It's all silver. The slabs here, you can see there's a little bit more decoration on the um-num-zahn. You've got these cool milling marks on both sides, whereas the Sebenza kind of keeps a cleaner kind of look to it with none of that going on. It does, however, have a hole here, which matches up to the relief hole cut for the lock. So it goes all the way through right there, which is pretty cool. Pivots are obviously very different. However, the pivot on the um-num-zahn has changed from the proprietary pivot to a Torx pivot. However, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it's changed to this exact pivot or if it's still larger. But in this version, this is a much larger pivot. I don't just mean the outside, the actual inside of the pivot is much larger. I think that looks really cool. I prefer this look than the new one. Even though it does take the special tool to take it down, I still prefer that right there. Weight, kind of as I mentioned before, the um-num-zahn does weigh a little bit more, not a ton, a little bit more. That's mainly due to the thicker stock on the blade, and then there's also a little bit more material on the handle. You can see how this has this finger choil cut out here, whereas the um-num-zahn doesn't really have that. And then the um-num-zahn has a few extra features that add to the weight as well, like the double thumb studs and then the lack of the hole here. A lot of small stuff that kind of just adds up to a little extra weight. Nothing major. Ergonomics, they actually feel about the same, even though the handle shape is quite a bit different. This one attempts to be more ergonomic. You can see the finger choil right here, then you've got a secondary one right there kind of, and then this kind of recessed area there for your final two fingers to fit into, and then a little bit more of a curve going on here. The Sebenza almost swells, it's concave right here, whereas this kind of comes straight and then it curves down that way. Really all you have on the Sebenza is the single finger choil, and the rest kind of just falls into place. But kind of like I mentioned before, you really don't, even with kind of the extra features, it doesn't, I'm still pressed to decide which one feels better, if either one of them. I mean, they both feel just fine. So maybe I would say this one, but just barely. These changes really aren't that noticeable once you actually get it in your hand. So that's the basic gist of it right there. The differences between these two. Price point wise, the um-num-zahn is going to cost you about $15 more about. but they're both great knives. I'd recommend picking either one of these up. If I had to pick which one I kind of just like more, I would have to say the um-num-zahn. I just think, you know, personally I'm more of a tactical, hard use kind of guy. Not because I need it, but just I like it. I just like that in knives. And just, it's a little more stylish. Has a little bit more going on, a little heavier duty, and just a really cool knife. Plus, I like dual thumb studs. Not so much that I like to pay for them, but I like it when they're on there. So I do prefer the um-num-zahn. I think it just looks a little cooler, looks a little nicer. However, the Sebenza is nothing to shake your fist at. Wouldn't kick it out of bed for eating cookies, as my grandma would say. Alright guys, quick comparison. Actually not quick. I told myself I wouldn't say that anymore. A fairly lengthy comparison between these two. Alright guys, see you later.